Hearing of the Subcommittee on Nutrition Oversight and Department Operations entitled Hunger Amongst Veterans and Service Members, Understanding the Problem and Evaluating Solutions will come to order. Welcome, and thank you to everyone for joining this hearing today. After brief opening remarks, members will receive testimony from our witnesses today, and then the hearing will be open to questions. Members will be recognized in order of seniority, alternating between majority and minority members, and in order of arrival for those members who have joined us after the hearing was called to order. When you are recognized, you will be asked to unmute your microphone and will have 5 minutes to ask your questions or make a comment. If you are not speaking, I ask that you remain muted in order to minimize background noise. In order to get as many questions as possible, the timer will stay consistently visible on your screen. In consultation with the ranking member and pursuant to Rule 11E, I want to make members of the subcommittee aware that other members of the full committee may join us today. I'll now begin with my opening statement. Thank you all for joining me today for this very important hearing, which will help our subcommittee better understand the food security challenges that our nation's veterans and service members face. This conversation is especially significant, given that tomorrow we observe Veterans Day, a day for us to honor those who serve and their willingness to protect our nation. I hope this hearing helps to highlight the reality that too many veterans face when their service has ended. Food insecurity is disturbingly rampant among our veteran population. On average, about 1.2 million households with veterans participate in SNAP each year. Tragically, studies estimate that a substantial portion of eligible veterans, as high as 60%, do not participate in the program. Food insecurity particularly impacts veterans who have recently left service, had lower final pay grades, or live in rural or low-income areas that have limited access to food. Their hunger can also be exacerbated by mental and physical health challenges, including service-related disabilities. It is unacceptable that in America today, we cannot ensure that veterans do not struggle with food insecurity after the completion of their services. This problem does not spare our active duty service members either, who, despite working every day to serve this country, face the same challenges with food insecurity. According to USDA, 22,000 SNAP households included service members in 2019, and it is likely that that number is only the tip of the iceberg, as many military families face barriers to accessing SNAP. Service members and veterans who face different barriers and situations, Service members and veterans face different barriers and situations that can cause or worsen food insecurity. Some of these barriers are common amongst food insecure Americans, while others are unique and may require targeted solutions. No person should ever go hungry in America. However, it is especially galling to see those who have dedicated their lives to serving our nation struggle to put food on the table. Today is not a hearing to review or investigate any particular bill or piece of legislation, but rather we will gather information from the witnesses in our efforts to search for solutions to ensure no veteran or service member feels the sting of hunger. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of our veterans and service members. Please let me extend a heartfelt thank you and the gratitude of myself, and I'm sure every member of this subcommittee today and every day, for all you have done. We look forward to hearing from each of you and are committed to working to address this important issue. I'd now like to welcome the distinguished ranking member, the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Bacon, for any opening remarks he would like to give.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll keep my comments fairly short. I echo your comments about Veterans Day. I thank all our veterans who are listening, and I'm one myself. It's about 6% of our population, our veteran community, and there's always going to be problems in the world. We need people to serve, to defend this great country, and we thank those who have. I appreciate that. And referencing one of the Madam Chair's comments, I'm also concerned we have veterans come out and they're having a hard time making ends meet. I think we should be trying to do everything we can to help transition these folks with trades. The various we're such a shortage of trade programs right now, whether it's truck drivers, welders, carpenters. There's opportunities to put our veterans into these really great paying jobs, and so I support a lot of programs to help with it, making that connection. And when it comes to our servicemen and women who may be needing SNAP, I really would like to hear from the military itself. Is this really a problem? We could have got one of our chief master sergeants of the Air Force or the equivalent in the Army or Navy, just to hear from them. What are they hearing with their E1s, E2s, and E3s in this area? Or we could have got someone from the personnel, like the A1s or the J1 for the joint staff, just to give us the ground level truth of what the military is seeing here. Because if this is a more rampant problem, well, the military needs to address it. And in the HASC, we can adjust pay levels to make this right. And there has been some discussion about doing that, but this is really an area where the HASC and the personnel subcommittee probably needs to be bore into, get to ground truth, and then find solutions within the military to solve. So with that, I'll yield back. I look forward to hearing what our panelists are saying. By the way, I did try to invite someone from DOD here, and they did not take the invite. But I think it's important to get their perspective on this. So with that, I yield back, and I thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ranking Member. And we will continue to look for solutions to get the information that you're seeking. I do believe that DOD has a policy that they don't testify on mixed panels. So we'll collect information from this group and see what we can do moving forward. I'm not sure if the chair or the ranking member are here and would like to offer any opening statements. I don't see either Mr. Chairman or Mr. Thompson, so I'll move on. The chair would request that other members submit their opening statements for the record, so witnesses may begin their testimony and to ensure that there is ample time for questions. Without objection, the chair is authorized at any time to declare the subcommittee in recess, subject to the call of the chair. And now I'll introduce the witnesses. I am pleased to welcome such a distinguished panel of witnesses to our hearing today. Our witnesses bring to our hearing a wide variety of experience and expertise, and I thank you all for joining us. Our first witness today is Ms. Mia Hubbard, who is the Vice President of Programs for Maison, a Jewish response to hunger. She provides leadership for Maison's advocacy, grant making, and strategic program efforts, and has been with the organization since 1993. Our next witness is Ms. Denise Hollywood, the Chief Community and Program Officer for Blue Star Families, a nonprofit that serves military families. In her role, Ms. Hollywood manages membership and volunteer programs, program design and delivery, policy decision and evaluation, and more. She received her Air Force commission from Cornell University and proudly served for 20 years. Our third witness is Dr. Nipa Kamdar, a nurse practitioner and nurse scientist who has published several peer-reviewed studies on food insecurity affecting veterans. She is employed by the Veteran Health Administration and holds a faculty appointment at Baylor College of Medicine, but is testifying today as a private citizen. I hope I said your name right. Our final witness today is Mr. Tim Keefe. He is a veteran who served in the United States Navy. After being injured at work and completing all measures included in the workers' compensation process, Mr. Keefe found himself unable to return to work and fell on hard times. SNAP has served as a lifeline for him, as it does for many other veterans in similar situations. Welcome to all of our witnesses. We will now proceed to hearing your testimony. You will each have 5 minutes. The timer should be visible on your screen and will count down to 0, at which point your time has expired. Ms. Hubbard, please begin when you are ready.
Well, thank you, Chairwoman Hayes, Ranking Member Bacon, and the distinguished members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today, representing my zone, A Jewish Response to Hunger. Let us step back for just a moment and reflect on how absurd it is that we actually even need to discuss this problem, one that should never have been allowed to happen in the first place, let alone to persist with little to no attention or action to address it. There is simply no reason that military families and veterans should experience the painful reality of hunger. As I will share with you, there are several straightforward actions that Congress, the administration, and federal agencies can take to address this preventable problem. My zone's work is grounded in Jewish values to pursue justice and to respect the inherent dignity of every person. We are guided by a central belief: regardless of a person's circumstance, no one deserves to go hungry. We've made it a priority to spotlight issues and populations where large organizations and the government have yet to turn their focus. For nearly a decade, we have diligently led the national efforts to call attention to and address military and veteran food insecurity. In 2012, when we first became aware of the alarming number of military families struggling with food insecurity, we made it a priority to understand the issue and explore policy solutions. We thought it would be a quick fix, but here we are nearly a decade later facing a crisis. Time and again, my colleagues and I have been criticized, dismissed, ignored for raising this issue, both by policymakers and frankly by some in the anti-hunger community. We recognize this is an issue that is often hidden, which is understandable since struggling military and veteran families do not want to call attention to their situation. But it is a crisis nevertheless, and we therefore call on you to immediately advance policy solutions. Your leadership and that of the administration and agency officials is urgently needed to chart a different course. Military and veteran families have been allowed to go hungry on your watch, and your inaction has allowed this situation to persist for years and to grow worse over the course of the pandemic, which has contributed to the worsening of diet-related diseases, loss in productivity, and even spikes in suicide rates. While this hearing and my testimony will address the issue of food insecurity for both currently serving military and veteran families, we must be clear that these are two different populations with distinct challenges, needs, and opportunities for policy change. So my proposals are twofold. For military families, Congress and the administration must support and prioritize inclusion of the full Military Family Basic Needs Allowance provision in the 2022 National Defense Authorization Act. In 2019, following years of responding to objection about military families' access to SNAP, my colleague, Josh Protas, my zone's VP of Public Policy, devised and created this proposal to address those objections. And it's worked. The proposal now has broad bipartisan support in both the House and Senate, as well as support from countless military service and anti-hunger organizations across the country. We just need your help to get it across the finish line. In addition, the administration must take executive action to ensure that service members' basic allowance for housing does not count as income in determining eligibility for federal food programs. Congress must study and document, in collaboration with the administration, the full scope of military hunger and publish comprehensive data. And Congress should re-examine military pay levels, acknowledging that the composition and needs of America's military has changed significantly over time, and that changes to pay and benefits have not responded adequately. For veterans, Congress must protect and improve SNAP and encourage the VA to connect veterans to this essential program. Success should not be measured by how many food pantries operate at VA centers, but rather how many food pantries are necessary because veterans are getting the access to SNAP. We should integrate information about federal food programs into the Transition Assistance Program and the new Solid Start Veteran Suicide Prevention Program. And finally, we should listen to the voices of veteran and military families. Real stories from people like our witness who we'll hear from today, Tim Keefe, are essential to understanding the needs and barriers so that we can craft the right solutions. For my zone, this is a matter of mission readiness, troop retention, and future recruitment. And as policymakers, your role is essential and urgent. We welcome the opportunity to work with you on advancing these recommendations, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hubbard, and right under 5 minutes. Good job. I now recognize Ms. Hollywood. If you would unmute and please begin when you are ready.
My name is Denise Hollywood, and I'm the Chief Community and Programs Officer for Blue Star Families, the largest national nonprofit organization supporting military and veteran families. We are nationally recognized for our annual Military Family Lifestyle Survey, the largest and most comprehensive survey of its kind, covering a wide variety of topics that impact military and veteran families. Today, I'm here to share with you what our surveys have revealed about food insecurity. In 2020, 14% of enlisted active duty family respondents and 12% of veteran family respondents reported low or very low food security. While a greater proportion of junior enlisted family respondents indicated that they were food insecure, this issue was not limited to the junior enlisted ranks. Our data also suggests that military families of color are struggling with food insecurity at higher levels than their white peers. Blue Star Family's early findings align with existing research regarding wealth inequality in the United States. It is worth emphasizing that in the military community, food insecurity is an issue that primarily affects families rather than single, unattached service members. We know from our research that several intersecting structural challenges contribute to military families' financial stress, including military spouse unemployment, the lack of affordable childcare, and high out-of-pocket housing expenses. Each of these factors and others can undermine a military family's financial readiness and contribute to food insecurity. Military spouses face significant barriers to employment. The unemployment rate for military spouses was nearly 7 times greater than the national unemployment rate pre-pandemic and has not decreased significantly since 2012. Crucially, the lack of affordable childcare continues to be a major contributor to military spouse unemployment, with 34% of active duty spouses who were unemployed but needed or wanted to work, citing the high costs of childcare as a barrier to their employment. Military family financial stress is further complicated by out-of-pocket housing expenses. Today, the basic allowance for housing is pegged to 95% of local area rent. We see in our data that families that prioritize their children's school, which are most military families, often end up paying significantly more out of pocket than DoD's cost share estimates. Additionally, our data shows that barriers, both bureaucratic and psychological, exist that prevent military families from accessing federal nutrition assistance programs. Financial stress and the stigma surrounding needing support does not end when a family leaves the military. To the contrary, a military family's financial difficulties can be compounded by transition-related challenges, thereby leading to veteran food insecurity. Creating the conditions for active duty family financial resilience and destigmatizing the need for assistance will therefore help prevent veteran hunger downstream. The need is great. Between May 2020 and October 2021, Blue Star Families hosted 50 food security related events, including drive-through food distributions, grocery store gift card distributions, sustainable gardening events, and holiday meals for families in need. We helped to increase the immediate food security for over 7,000 military and veteran families through these programs. However, we must work to address the underlying factors that contribute to food insecurity among military families. These issues are persistent and will take time to resolve. We encourage you to amend Section 403K, Title 37 of the United States Code to exclude the Basic Allowance for Housing, BAH, from being counted as income when calculating eligibility for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, and other federal nutrition assistance benefits. Including BAH in the evaluation of SNAP eligibility creates an artificial and unnecessary barrier for military families, as the allowance is a non-taxable portion of a service member's pay that allows for equitable housing compensation. Addressing this barrier, which many military families face in accessing food assistance, would help those struggling to make ends meet during this unprecedented pandemic and would boost the financial resilience of those military families. I would like to thank again the distinguished members of the subcommittee for their efforts to eliminate military and veteran hunger. Those who make significant sacrifices for our country should never struggle to put food on the table for their families.
Thank you for your testimony. I now recognize Dr. Kamdar. Please begin when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Hayes, Ranking Member Bacon, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for allowing me to share my work with you. As a nurse practitioner and researcher, I recognize food insecurity or the lack of access to healthy food is a threat to the well-being of veterans who have served our nation. Nearly all the veterans who participate in my research ask what I will do with the information they openly and bravely share. This opportunity to testify before the members of this subcommittee allows me to directly communicate what I learned from them with those who have the power to make change. Before I begin, I'd like to clarify that although I'm employed by the Veterans Health Administration and have a faculty appointment at Baylor College of Medicine, today I'm presenting to you as a private citizen. The views and opinions expressed in this testimony are mine and do not necessarily express the official policy or position of Baylor College of Medicine or the Veterans Health Administration. One approach to understanding the problem of food insecurity is to place a quantifiable number to capture its scope. Using data from the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, I learned that veterans who are food insecure are almost 3 times more likely to suffer from very low food security compared to non-veterans who share similar socioeconomic characteristics like age, gender, and income. My team and I also found that veterans dealing with very low food security have an almost 4-fold increase in odds of suicidal ideation. Although these statistics provide evidence that food insecurity is a serious threat, they do not capture the struggles of veterans who are food insecure. For that, I listened to veterans who have experienced food insecurity and will share some of what I learned. Any names I use are pseudonyms to protect their identity. I'll start with Ed. Ed is a 39-year-old Marine veteran who reminded me that no one is ever just food insecure. Nearly all the veterans I have met in my studies struggle with other basic needs like housing, transportation, and childcare. They are making hard decisions on how to spend their next $20. As Sheila, a 34-year-old single mother of 3 and Army veteran explained, how much I'm spending on gas affects how much I have left over for food. Gas comes over food. Following this statement, I asked Sheila if she ever skipped a meal. She looked at me and said, I've skipped out on meals plenty of times, plenty of days. Too many veterans ration their personal food intake to ensure that their children and others in their family do not go hungry. Some, like Haley, a 35-year-old Army veteran and single mother of 3, have tried to increase their food supply. Haley applied for SNAP 4 times but never qualified. Ultimately, she stopped applying. She said, I've been burned so many times, I don't try it anymore. The sense of desolation was shared by other veterans when their attempts to find help fell short. For many veterans like Sarah, a 33-year-old Army veteran, finding help was a matter of luck. Years ago, when she was homeless and pregnant, Sarah's life was gratefully rescued by a fellow veteran on the bus one day when he noticed her Army t-shirt. After asking if Sarah needed help, he directed her to a veterans center where she was fed and connected to much needed resources. This event was a major turning point in her life. What would have happened if Sarah and her fellow veteran were not on the same bus that day? The experiences that these veterans share point to the complex nature of food insecurity and the challenges of finding effective solutions. One approach to finding effective solutions is to use the public health model of prevention. This model consists of 3 levels of prevention: primary, which is focused on preventing the problem in the first place; secondary, which is identifying the problem as early as possible; and tertiary, which is reducing the damage and preventing the problem from getting worse. Most efforts to reduce food insecurity focus on tertiary prevention with food distributions and the USDA food assistance programs. There is also increased attention on screening for food insecurity, which is a form of secondary prevention. However, the most effective, but also the most complex solutions address the root causes of food insecurity. So far, research indicates that veterans find with physical and mental health, housing instability, and financial instability. This means that efforts to address food insecurity need to tackle these. Additionally, veterans have described the initial 6 to 12 months post-separation from active duty as being a time of high risk for food insecurity. This is also a time when they run out of money, may still be looking for a job, and may not have yet received care for health-related issues. Thus, another proactive approach to reduce their risk of food insecurity is to leverage the Transition Assistance Program to facilitate registration into the Veterans Health Administration so that veterans have access to healthcare and auxiliary support like social work. This is also a prime opportunity to encourage transitioning service members, especially those who are enlisted grade 7 or below, to apply for SNAP. Moving forward, I encourage all who strive to reduce food insecurity among veterans to balance the need to address immediate food shortages with the need to address contributing factors. Once again, I thank the subcommittee, and I wish all veterans in the subcommittee and abroad a very happy Veterans Day.
I don't think I was unmuted. Thank you for your testimony. I now recognize our final witness, Mr. Keefe. Please unmute and begin when you're ready.
Good morning or afternoon. Now I'm confused with all the Zoom stuff, but Chairwoman Hayes, ranking member Bacon, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. My name is Tim Keefe, and I'd like to start by saying that I've worked since I was 11 years old. I never had to worry about being hungry. I just work and I'd eat. It wasn't until I couldn't work that I experienced real hunger, what that was about. I suffered an injury at work, as the chairwoman said, and after 2 years of surgeries and physical therapy, occupational therapy, it was another 2 years before I could get even the status to get back to work, as the Department of Labor had me medically unable to work. So with no income or address, by that time I became homeless. I applied for SNAP benefits and received $194 worth of food. This was crucial. However, but because of work restrictions, I was cut off after 3 months. I brought all my paperwork to SNAP and the declaration by the Department of Labor that I was medically unable to work. I was told that this did not qualify me for disabled status, in which the work restriction would be waived. I showed my doctor's paperwork, which basically cleared me from work, although the Department of Labor wasn't reading it that way. This was to no avail. I then asked for the paperwork I needed to volunteer to satisfy the work restrictions that way. The screener told me he didn't feel comfortable putting me into a volunteer situation with my injury. So I asked, what do I eat? He said, there was an appeal process that I could go through and appeal the decision. And so I asked, what do I eat until then? I waited in silence for a solid minute as he stared blankly back at me and finally said there was nothing he could do for me. In the year that followed, I filed appeals to both SNAP and the Maine Department of Labor for a change in status, but I lost all of them. In the meantime, I had 7 holes. I had to add 7 holes to the belt I was wearing to keep my pants up. My conditions devolved into that of a caveman. That's all I could think of. I'm living like a caveman. False. Nothing better than that. Foraging took up a lot of my time. But once a month, I could hitchhike 25 miles to visit in either direction, actually, which was fortunate. I could visit the food pantries there. I was able to fill a backpack with enough food to give me a meal a day for 2 weeks if I stretched it. Still, there were more days than I care to remember where there was nothing to eat. The food bank offered supplemental food once a month and had me eating 1 meal a day. But the food bank has limited resources, and I'm truly grateful for that food, but I know that I still lack nutrition and calories. SNAP, in my particular case, would have gone a long way to bolstering my health during this time, as I continued to wade through a seemingly endless appeals process. Unfortunately, I can tell you firsthand that when you have gone a couple of days without food, your whole being cries out for it. The desperation I can't explain. You can't sleep, as tired as you are. You can't do anything but think about it and try to get food. I contemplated stealing food. I could hitchhike down to the supermarket and fill a backpack, and if I got caught, I'd go to jail and I'd eat. If I got away, I could have the food and I'd eat, but I was able to resist this urge. It's a desperation I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. A little more than a year later, I turned 50 and aged out of the work restrictions. I immediately reapplied. I think I was in there on my birthday, if I'm not mistaken, and received that $194 benefit. It amounts to about $6.45 a day. But it didn't take long for my health and energy to increase. I started gaining the weight back. The return of SNAP benefits meant that I could concentrate on improving other areas of my life. And a year later, I was working again. I would like to also raise awareness for the veterans who are not disabled, but are returning to society with the unique experience of having to adjust from a combat zone to everyday life. Surely we can feed them. When I swore into the Navy in Boston, I was ready and willing to give my life for this country. And it seemed like during this time, I couldn't even get a sandwich from them. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Keith. At this time, members will be recognized for questions in order of seniority, alternating between majority and minority members. You will be recognized for 5 minutes each in order to allow us to get to as many questions as possible. Please keep your microphones muted until you are recognized in order to minimize background noise. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. First of all, Mr. Keith, thank you for your service and for your powerful testimony. You are exactly what members of this committee, your testimony is exactly what members of this committee need to hear as we search for solutions. I understand that after you turned 50, you were able to access SNAP benefits since the time limit on benefits for adults without dependents phased out at that age. Based on your experience, do you believe that the SNAP work requirement incentivizes work, or do you think they have unintended consequences specifically for veterans?
Well, definitely unintended consequences. I feel like there was like a fissure that I fell through this thing, this catch-22 that just opened up in front of me and swallowed me up. So definitely that. The work restrictions, I mean, isn't laying your life down the line enough work?
Thank you, Mr. Keith. Ms. Kamdar, you mentioned in your testimony the sense of desolation that veterans feel when they are denied assistance. How can we better address hunger and food insecurity among veterans who are living on the poverty line? And based on your research, would allowing people to save more money while still qualifying for SNAP, for example, raising the asset limits, be helpful in this situation?
I do believe that one of the reasons why many of the veterans who told me that they applied for SNAP couldn't qualify was because their disability counted as income. So if the disability could be removed as an income qualifier, then perhaps that would open opportunity for more of them to get SNAP benefits. I'm sorry, can you repeat the first question that you had?
Yes, I said, how do we better address hunger and food insecurity amongst veterans who are living on the poverty line?
So I think having those safety nets available to them, having access to those safety nets is critical. That addresses the immediate needs that they have. But then also we need to consider childcare, transportation, housing, because they're all so interrelated. So if we only focus on food and we neglect those other important and critical needs, we're only addressing part of the problems that they're facing.
Do you think that we need to make specific changes that are unique to our veterans and service members? Because as you mentioned, it is a different population.
They have their own unique culture. And I do believe that the way we approach them to help them needs to be unique to their culture. Most veterans I've met don't want to feel like they're getting a handout, but if they can understand that this is assistance that they've earned, that they deserve, and it's presented to them respectively and honorably, those are the approaches that we need to make sure that they're receiving the care with.
Thank you. Ms. Hollywood, studies have shown that food insecurity is associated with increased risk of negative mental and physical health outcomes, including depression, hypertension, diabetes, and oral health problems. These outcomes seem particularly problematic for service members whose jobs often depend on staying physically and mentally fit. Do you believe that food insecurity harms our military readiness and recruitment and retention efforts?
Our research doesn't have a specific statistic on that, but I would say that just as a veteran who served for 20 years in the Air Force, that anything that impacts our military readiness is an important problem we need to attack.
Thank you. I think it's critical to note that this is a population that has higher instances of disability. So we really need to, in my opinion, think about the way disabilities are counted towards benefits in most of these cases. Thank you all for your thoughtful answers to my questions. I yield back, and I now recognize the distinguished ranking member, Mr. Bacon, for his questions. You can unmute. And
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for all the testimony today. And Mr. Keith, thank you for sharing. Did you say that they wouldn't allow you to have disability? Did I understand it correct? Or you weren't offered a disability recognition?
Yeah, so of course I went to the feds and had them examine me for federal disability, and they said, no, I was fine. My doctor said, my condition would improve. I had a torn cartilage in my hand, which I see people working with one hand. I just didn't understand what was happening to me at the time.
Okay, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Ms. Hubbard, I've had one of the command chiefs of one of the services visit with me recently, and he told me that the pay for our junior enlisted really hasn't been reviewed in decades. And so what we've seen is, like, every year you get a cost of living increase, but when you do a 3% raise, for example, at a lower pay versus the higher grades, that disparity keeps getting bigger. Would you not think that maybe this is a more effective way of trying to address food insecurity? I would think for our junior enlisted is maybe reviewing the pay.
Yes, I agree that military pay levels need to be looked at. And I think that's an issue and a solution that is working, really far upstream on this issue, which is, of course, I think where we all need to focus, right? As far upstream on these issues as we can. It's a big lift, I think. And I think in the meantime, some of the other proposals and solutions that are being put forth and that we'll discuss today, I think can help these families to be able to put food on the table. But yeah, I agree. I think, we have so many more enlisted members who are supporting families and need additional supports. And so we really do need to look at how the composition of our military has changed over time and make sure that our pay and the benefits are supporting them adequately.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate that feedback. And I'm hearing some feedback from our most senior enlisted leaders in the military, thinking it's time that the HASC, or the Armed Services Committee, and the Personnel Subcommittee maybe take a look at this. I just heard that last week, in fact, from one of them. So maybe I'll turn over to Miss Hollywood, excuse me. I know we've worked hard on extending family tours or tours of our enlisted so that spouses could get employment more easily so they don't lose their jobs. We're also working on licensing laws so that if you're licensed in Virginia, it will work in, say, Illinois or whatever, and so forth. Are you seeing a positive impact here on some of these adjustments we're making on families for spouse income?
Sir, the needle is moving, but it's not moving nearly fast enough. And the primary reason why it's not is the childcare issue, because the licensing is great, but if we don't fix the childcare issue, we're never gonna move the needle on military spouse unemployment.
Now, most bases offer childcare. So are you saying it's not enough capacity at each base, or some bases not doing? Because every base I've been on has childcare provisions.
In my active duty life, I was a squadron commander for those units that did run childcare facilities, and never enough capacity. Never enough capacity coupled with the cost. And granted, childcare facilities on military installations are subsidized, but there's just increasing costs on and off installation. So that's really a primary concern of military spouses that has prevented successful military spouse, the unemployment for military spouses for the needle to move like we'd like to see it.
Okay. Well, I don't know if it's, I'd be curious to get from the military subcommittee if this capacity's gone down or up. You know, I did 30 years in the Air Force, and where we were at, we, like at one base, we had 2 child cares there. So it's maybe hit and miss depending on which base. But I think most of the bases I've been on have tried to provide that capacity because I know it's a concern for a lot of families. You mentioned you didn't think we should count housing or the substance, or the food allowances towards pay. But for some, that's over 1,000 or it could be up to 1,500. It varies based on where you're living. But you don't think they should count that towards determining SNAP income? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I think we need parity with our civilian military family members need parity with their civilian counterparts. This is taxable. This is not taxable income. BAH isn't taxable, the housing allowance. So it almost feels like having BAH be part of what makes you eligible or not eligible for SNAP is a disservice, and it's not on par with what our civilian counterparts would have.
Do civilian counterparts get BAS and housing allowance?
No, but their salaries would be reflective of those different allowances.
Yeah, I guess it's a debatable point, but I appreciate your perspective on it. Then one other thing I guess I'm out of time, so I better yield back to the Madam Chair. So thank you.
I was going to let you go, Representative Bacon. I'll add from the committee, thank you again for your service. 30 years is quite impressive. And to Ms. Hollywood, to your point, highlighting the childcare issue, that is part of the President's Build Back Better agenda to offer universal pre-care and a 7% cap for childcare costs, because we've heard this over and over from different communities. I now recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Representative McGovern. You have 5 minutes for your questions.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And look, this is not a new issue. We've been talking about this. You've been talking about this. I know Mazone has been talking about this. And others have been, Blue Star families have been talking about this for years. The bottom line is that the powers that be haven't done anything about it. The Pentagon has known this for years. And yet, they have not come up to the Hill and asked that we not count the housing allowance toward total income, so that those people who are struggling could actually get SNAP. They haven't done that. And they haven't been up here, shaking the trees for a better compensation for enlisted service men and women. That has to change. I mean, we know there's a problem. There was a problem here. For anyone to apply that there's not a problem is ignoring reality. And by the way, it's not just amongst active duty service members, it's amongst our veterans. Mr. Keefe, I want to thank you for your service to our country as well. And I want to thank you for sharing your story today. I first learned about you through a Washington Post article in which it talked about what you went through. And I think all too often, the voices of people with lived experiences are left out of policymaking. And I hope that my colleagues on this committee who have advocated for harsher time limits and work requirements are listening to your testimony, because in real life, things don't fall into nice, neat categories. There's a lot of gray area. And that's where your situation is. And by the way, the average time that somebody is on SNAP anyway is less than a year. But in your case, you've clearly laid out how cruel these requirements are. They do not make sense, and how complicated the lives of people living in struggling in poverty are. So I want to ask you, what kind of things would have helped you make ends meet after you lost your job? I mean, what can Congress do to better help people who fall into your situation, in addition to not having these harsh and cruel time limits or work requirements? How could the system have been more helpful to you?
Well, to start with, a complete audit of the workman's comp system would probably reveal a couple things. But Well, you know, it dawned on me that the Department of Labor's decision didn't affect SNAP, and the federal decision didn't affect the Department of Labor's decision. It dawned on me these agencies are at odds with each other in dealing with me at the time, and it was creating quite a vortex that I was falling into. The paperwork on the appeals I have for all this is ridiculous. What would have helped me, as the doctor said, stopping the bleeding, immediate stopping the bleeding. If I could have gone to, you know, the military medical center and gotten something to eat and maybe a box of food or something, that would have been great. And I'm mirroring the food banks because this is an effective program. These people give you food. You walk out of the building with food. There's no red tape in between. There's no anything. They give you food. You know.
But clearly, if there had been no arbitrary time limit on your SNAP benefit, that would have helped, right? That would have provided you, right? Which, you know, and again, you know, real life is complicated. It doesn't fit into nice sound bites. And I really appreciate your testimony. I know I'm running out of time, but I do want to thank my friends in Mazzone for their attention to this issue. They have for a long time been sounding the alarm about the seriousness of the hunger problem amongst our active duty servicemen and women, but also amongst our veterans. I mean, people who put their lives on the line for our country, people who served our country, are in this situation where they don't know where the next meal is going to come from. All of us should be ashamed. And again, this is not a new revelation we're hearing here today. We've been hearing about this for a long time. The question is whether or not we're going to do anything about it, or whether we're going to raise questions as to whether this is all real. It is real. And I think, you know, we've heard from Mr. Keefe. There were lots of other people, you know, talk to our friends at, you know, at Blue Star Families as well. They have documented case after case after case. So look, we know there's solutions here. We have to act. We got to do something. And I know I'm out of time, but I want to thank you all for your testimony. This is really helpful. And as we approach Veterans Day, let's all resolve that we're going to, you know, by next year have done something so that we don't have to hear these stories, and we've actually helped make people's lives better. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. I now recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, where it's 70 degrees today, Representative Desjardins.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Chairwoman. And thank you to our witnesses for appearing today. Clearly, this is an important topic, and it almost seems as if we should have the VA committee and HAS committee included today to discuss this, because they're all intertwined. And we don't want to see anyone in the country go hungry, but we certainly owe a debt of gratitude to our service members and our military veterans who, as our witness said, put their lives on the line for us. And we want this not to be one of their problems. But I would like to note that the House Armed Services passed the fiscal year 2021 and 22 Defense Authorization Act that all included provisions related to military hunger and the issues that we're here discussing today. The DOD had asked for an extension, now I guess on 2 occasions, to address the reports of hunger within the military. And now the report is due on March 31st of 2022. So I think we should all encourage the department to publish this information so we can get an accurate grasp on the situation and see what committees of jurisdiction should get involved here. Like I said, I think probably VA, HASC, and possibly AG. Now, it's interesting, in the 28 Farm Bill Conference Report, we did attempt to address this. Chairman Conaway had suggested that $500 of the BAH not be included. And for some reason, Mazon's reaction, among others, led to that provision being dropped from the fiscal 2018 Farm Bill. So I do take a little issue, Ms. Hubbard, with you saying that nobody cares and nobody's tried to do anything. That maybe wasn't enough, but it was something. And I'm not sure why that olive branch was rejected. So I guess I would just close with, again, thanking all of our veterans and military personnel. We certainly want to solve this problem, and I'm committed to working with those other committees to find a way to alleviate this problem, and wish everyone a happy Veterans Day, and I'll yield back.
Thank you, Congressman. I now recognize the gentlelady from North Carolina, Representative Adams. You have 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Chairwoman Hayes and Ranking Member Bacon for hosting the hearing today. And thank you to our witnesses for your testimony, and to our two veterans who are speaking today, who are witnesses. Thank you so much, Ms. Hollywood and Mr. Keefe, for your service. You know, it's disheartening to know that so many of our veterans and our military families don't know when their next meal will be. No one in this great country, especially the men and women who wear the uniform and bravely serve, should ever go hungry. But we must address longstanding barriers to veteran and military families' participation in SNAP with innovative and proactive solutions, which is why earlier this year, I introduced the Closing the Meal Gap, a bill that would eliminate eligibility time limits and unrealistic barriers for SNAP. Provisions like these are crucial and would prevent SNAP recipients from losing their benefits when they're not able to meet work requirements. For example, how we heard today of Mr. Keefe's testimony, creating a barrier to food access does not help anyone secure employment or make our communities healthier. So, Mr. Keefe, thank you again for your service and your willingness to share your story. Can you provide an estimate of how long after you became food insecure did you first apply to SNAP for benefits?
Well, it wasn't until after the workman's comp had run out. So 2 years after my injury.
Mm-hmm.
And,
okay.
And so then they gave me 3 months worth, which was the stipulations, and then cut me off abruptly.
Okay, were you screened for food insecurity at a healthcare facility while you were getting treated for your injuries, or provided with resources to prevent you from becoming food insecure and homeless?
Well, they asked if you had food, but that was about it. Really, there was only the food pantry was my life.
Yeah. Okay.
Really, they were the only ones offering.
Right. I think you've already indicated at least what you think Congress can do to make sure that the veteran experiences that are not the same kinds of hardships that you experience. So thank you for sharing that. Ms. Hollywood, as we all know, again, thank you for your service as well. The basic allowance for housing is currently considered as income when determining service members' eligibility for SNAP. So do you know why SNAP doesn't exclude the basic allowance for housing as income, but WIC does?
I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that is definitely a barrier to that having the BAH be part of income is definitely a barrier for military families, as is the fact that BAH is only pegged at 95% of the local area's rent. So that difference, that 5%, is another barrier, to be honest, for military families. Ma'am.
Right. Ms. Hubbard, can you respond to this question?
Yes. I mean, I think from where we sit, it's simply an oversight. And the BAH, that the BAH is not listed among many exclusions that are included in the SNAP program. So, that include, has already been mentioned, it's not counted or considered income for federal income tax purposes. And for most federal assistance programs, it's not treated as income. And so, it's really seems to be an oversight, and, it may have been unintended, but it's persisted.
Okay.
And so now it's
Right.
a choice, and we need
Thank
to
you.
make a change.
So Dr. Kamdar, you mentioned that efforts to prevent food insecurity need to start prior to separation from active duty. So could you please elaborate briefly on what efforts we should be focusing on and how Congress can help in this regard?
Well, as I said in my statement, my suggestion is that as the veterans are going, or as the transitioning service members are going through the TAPS courses, if there's a way that they can be signed up for healthcare through the Veteran Health Administration, that would at least connect them with healthcare so that there's not a gap there.
Right.
And then once they're in the VHA system, they would have access to other support systems like social work and case managers who can direct them when the needs arise, or
Right.
hopefully prevent the need from arising.
Well, thank you very much. I'm out of time, Madam Chair. I'm going to yield back.
Thank you, Representative Adams. I now recognize the gentleman from Indiana, Representative Beard. If you can unmute, you have 5 minutes for questioning.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Bacon. You know, I really appreciate this hearing today, but I'd really want to start off too, just by saying and expressing my appreciation to all of our nation's veterans and for all of those that have worn the uniform of the United States Armed Forces. And I want to thank Mr. Keefe for his testimony. My question really deals with the concern I have about, hunger in any demographic, but I'm especially concerned about, and has been expressed here already today, about veterans and active duty personnel. So I'm concerned that I don't feel that we have the kind of data that we need to make the analysis, and we don't have I don't know that we have an overall feeling of engagement. So my question then is to any member that would like to address this. The organizations that you represent, and have you conducted research and come up with various conclusions on this topic? And then I want to know how you've tried to share or have shared that with DOD or the VA or the House Armed Services Committee. So any one of you that would like to start is welcome. If you want me to do it.
Now, I'm actually happy to chime in. Thank you. Thank you first for your service, Representative Baird, and for the question. It's an important one, this issue of the lack of data around these issues. Obviously, we don't have enough data, and the federal government has not collected enough data, and there are definitely some gaps that need to be filled. And thankfully, we have colleagues in the field who have conducted studies and tried to give us information that we can use to make better public policy. But the federal government really is the place that has the capacity, the reach to really document this issue and needs to be held accountable to do it. And it's that lack of recognition that's really a problem. And it's simply unacceptable that we don't have the data. And I guess I would say not only does the government need to be held accountable, but it's also not an excuse for inaction. And hungry families, they can't wait for data. They can't eat another hunger study. And so while we need to continue to really push for the numbers, we also have to act. We can't wait any longer.
Dr. Kamdar?
I said I'm presenting today as a private citizen, so I really can't speak about any data that's in the VA or elsewhere. I will say that we have been able to use data from surveillance surveys like the Current Population Survey and the National Health and Nutrition Examination surveys, but it would be nice to have additional data.
Ms. Hollywood?
Sir, we've been conducting the annual Military Family Lifestyle Survey for 10 years now. So we do have data that I think could help us get the ball moving forward in the right direction, along with the data from the U.S. Army Public Health Center that was conducted recently among 11,000 soldiers at 2 different installations. So I think there's some data, there's a data baseline, continued data analysis, and would always be welcome. But I do think there is enough data now to actually help move the needle in the right direction.
Thank you. Dr. Kamdar, I've got about, it looks like 58 seconds left. And so my question to you is, I really appreciated you recognizing that veterans really are a unique culture, and in and on themselves, there's a bond there that as you approach them, you have to make sure you approach them appropriately. But I just thought I might ask you exactly how you think we ought to address homelessness, hunger, and unemployment for veterans. And you got 26 seconds, not to put pressure on you.
I don't have an eloquent answer in the 15 seconds I have left to address that, but I will say that veterans depend on other veterans. So some solution, I think the veterans are the best people to go to ask, how can we help you? And that's the approach that I take in my research. I don't have the solutions. I turn to the veterans to ask them, how can I help you? How can we help you?
Nice job. You did it real within time. So with that, I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Baird. I now recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Representative Rush. You have 5 minutes for your questions. Please unmute and begin.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and the ranking member for convening this particularly important hearing this morning. You know, I joined this conversation as a veteran of our armed services and also as a pastor of a local church that takes seriously the charge to feed the hungry and provide services for all of our wanting citizens and needy citizens. As a pastor of a church, as a congressman, and also as a Vietnam era veteran, these roles have informed my perspective on the importance of addressing food insecurity for our veterans and also for our active service members. Madam Chair, let me make sure that I am clear on this. Our veterans are one of our nation's most appreciated and most valuable assets. Their sacrifices should be, again, appreciated, and their requisite skills should also be eagerly anticipated in regards to our nation's future. And that said, Dr. Kamdar, I agree that the three-tiered approach is critical to prevent, to stop, and to treat the damage caused by food insecurity. While I agree with Ms. Hubbard's call to not allow the federal government to abdicate its responsibilities to the charitable sector, I firmly believe that there is a role for religious organizations and not-for-profits in this vital work. Churches, community organizations know their communities best, most of all, and they work with their communities on a day-to-day basis. And they are able to marshal food and intervene to provide assistance to the very veterans that we are concerned about, if they are given the proper support by the federal government. So my question, Dr. Kamdar and Ms. Hubbard, what is the current role of churches and not-for-profits in providing primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention of food insecurities? And how can the federal government better empower them to play a more effective role?
Well, I can address how churches can play a role in the secondary and tertiary prevention. Most of the veterans that I've encountered, when they are in need, they go to the community for assistance. And churches are one of those safe spaces that can ask their congregation, including those who are veterans, if they need assistance, if they're lacking any, if they're short on food. So screening would be one of them. And then the tertiary prevention, as you stated, churches are there to help, and they can be that source for that immediate needs. The ones that helped Tim stay alive for all practical purposes. So they can be a source of immediate relief, but they can also be a source that can help connect veterans to other resources that they need to address those upstream barriers that they may be facing. So if there is a support mechanism that can help them address those questions that they have, be a source of support, not just providing the food, but also helping to help them be an advocate.
Madam Chair, I only have a few seconds, so I yield back the balance of my time. Madam Chair, I yield back the balance of my time.
I'm sorry. I now recognize the gentlelady from Louisiana, Congresswoman Letlow.
Thank you, Chairwoman Hayes. As we look to tomorrow to recognize Veterans Day and show our utmost appreciation to the men and women who courageously stepped up to the line of duty to fight for the freedom we all share here at home, I'd like to extend a special thank you to the veterans testifying before us today and all the other service members and veterans for their service to our great country. Given the sacrifices of our servicemen and women, I believe it's only right that we in Congress ensure that our military and veteran families have the resources and care they need to prosper. However, for the purpose of this hearing, I echo the sentiments that my Republican colleagues have shared before me. Some of the topics discussed today are the direct jurisdiction of the House Armed Services Committee and matters pertaining to the Department of Defense. While the Agriculture Committee has oversight of the U.S. Department of Agriculture's supplemental nutrition programs, the committees of jurisdiction and the DoD need to be at the table to provide their insight and findings as it relates to the financial stability of active duty members and those transitioning out of the service. Ms. Hollywood, in your written testimony, you highlighted the barriers that military spouses face when considering gainful employment and how it contributes to families' financial stress. Can you speak to the Workforce Development Services Blue Star Families undertakes, specifically for unemployed spouses?
Yes, thank you. One of the things that we really strive to do at Blue Star Families is partner with other organizations to share resources. So we are a hub of resources for our military spouses to help them find not only resources on the training side to help them get some of the needed training they may need. Maybe they've been out of the job market for a few years because they were living in a state and then they moved to another state and couldn't find similar employment. So not only do we find those additional resources, we provide mentorship opportunities, and then we also connect with industry partners who are really looking to increase their pipeline of military spouses. I think the more we can educate industry on the ongoing problems with military spouse unemployment, the more we can get industry to employ our military spouses and learn about their unique situations as a result of being a military spouse.
Thank you. That's encouraging to hear. I do have a follow-up question as it relates to our veterans. Does Blue Star Families provide any services for individuals transitioning out of the service to help them find post-active duty employment or help them navigate other programs offered? And how would you measure the success of these programs?
Yes, we do provide those programs. Our programs are open to both active duty and veteran families. So any transitioning veteran who would like to come in and take part of any of our programs, that is an option for them. We measure success of our programs through an annual impact survey. And we also do program evaluations after each particular program that we do. So I'd say we've had some good success moving the needle and trying to get military spouses employed. We've hosted, I think our current pipeline of military spouses who are looking for training is over 10,000 people. So just getting folks in the door to try to get resources, I think is also a measurement of success on the military spouse front.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hollywood. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Letlow. And I'll just add that while hunger is a very complex issue and there are multiple committees that have jurisdiction, the House Agriculture, Nutrition Oversight, and Department Operations Subcommittee, this committee has jurisdiction over policies and statutes related to nutrition, including SNAP, domestic commodity distribution, and consumer initiatives. So it is absolutely something that we should be working to try to address. I now recognize the gentleman from California, Representative Carvajal. You have 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Chairwoman Hayes and Ranking Member Bacon. My Central Coast District is home to a robust military community, including active duty military personnel and many veterans who have devoted their lives to protecting our country. As a veteran myself, I'm committed to ensuring that our brave men and women who have sacrificed so much for our country, along with their families, have the resources they need. Ms. Hubbard, as has been discussed, you highlight barriers service members face when their basic allowance for housing is treated as income, and which can affect their eligibility for federal nutrition programs like SNAP. You also highlight other factors that increases service members' chance of being food insecure, like base salaries that do not reflect the reality of our modern military force, and the lack of access to affordable childcare. The Military Hunger Prevention Act, a bipartisan bill I co-led with members of this subcommittee, including Representative Panetta, Ranking Member Bacon, and Representative Baird, would create a basic needs allowance to support low-income service members who are not eligible for SNAP. Could you please speak on how this bill would improve the crisis at hand? I know you've touched on it already, but if you could expand on it, I would greatly appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question and for your support and leadership on this. The Military Family Basic Needs Allowance, if enacted, would basically call on the DoD to automatically notify service members of their potential eligibility for this allowance if they're at or below 130% of the federal poverty line, which is the base minimum of the gross income threshold for SNAP. And, you know, the DoD doesn't have all of the household's information. And so a service member would have to report additional income, including their spouse's income. They could opt out if they chose not to participate. But if they did qualify and were able to participate, they would basically get kind of a plus up in their base pay, which would put them at above the 130% poverty line. And it's really an opportunity to respond to the barriers that we're seeing in SNAP and to be able to give these service members a little extra money they can use to respond to basic needs. So, you know, we've got bipartisan support for it, and I'm really hoping we can get it done. It's the full provision is in the House NDAA. The Senate version, unfortunately, does include the BAA as income. So that particular version of it would not be as effective, and we're hoping that the House version will be the version that ends up in the final NDAA bill. So we really appreciate your work on it and your leadership and those on the committee who've also supported us.
Thank you. And following up to that, could you also speak on how this bill could help improve mental health outcomes for our military serving families?
Yes, thank you for that. I think a number of us have mentioned in our earlier remarks about the correlation between food insecurity and negative mental health outcomes, including suicide. And so I think responding to food insecurity is a critical action that we can take to address the crisis of increasing rates of military suicide. And so I think whether it's, you know, the screening that we're doing or in the care that is being provided. And one of the things that I mentioned was the Solid Start program, the Veteran Suicide Prevention Program, and being able to make sure that folks are getting information about food insecurity and about resources that they can use, including the SNAP program, to address it, will help with this interconnection between food insecurity and mental health outcomes.
Thank you so much. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you for your questions. I now recognize the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Jacobs. I'm not sure if she's on. Okay, the next witness that I had on the Republican side is Representative Kamak from Florida. Okay, I recognize the gentleman from California, Representative Panetta. You have 5 minutes for questioning.
Standing. Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate this opportunity. And of course, thank you to all of the witnesses, as well as my colleagues who are not just interested, but actually focused on doing something about this pressing issue. So thanks to all of you, and especially the witnesses who are willing to discuss some of these tough issues of military hunger and hunger amongst our veterans. As you've heard, and I think we all kind of believe that these issues really represent a failure of our government to serve those who have served us. And today, you and my colleagues that we've heard from have expressed a number of the complicating reasons, but also some solutions that we can put forward here in Congress to help. For example, we've heard how the USDA counts the BAH towards income when considering SNAP eligibility. That's resulted, as you know, in low-income military families being disqualified from SNAP and having to rely on food pantries and food banks for emergency food assistance. That's why, to address that specific issue, I introduced the Bipartisan Military Hunger Prevention Act, which you've heard discussed, talked about. And I was fortunate to have the support of my colleagues on this panel, Reps. Bacon, Baird, and Carbajal. And this bill would make up for that loss by providing military households with the basic needs allowance to purchase groceries. Now, although it's unfortunate that SNAP military families must resort to that program, I do believe it's our responsibility to ensure that those families, at the least, have access to this necessary support that they need to lead healthy, food-secure lives. Now, we're going to continue to work on this policy in the conference NDAA, and I encourage all of my colleagues, not just on this hearing, but throughout Congress, to join in that effort. Now, we've also heard what we must do to support our military spouses who struggle with unemployment. That's why I was proud to introduce, along with Representatives Delgado and Bacon, the Military Spouse Hiring Act, which would make military spouses eligible for the Workforce Opportunity Tax Credit, so that businesses are actually incentivized to hire those married to our service members. We got to do more to take care of those who have protected us, who have served us, and not deter the good men and women from enlisting or serving in our armed services. Now, let me just hit on the bill, if I could, a couple of questions on the Military Hunger Prevention Act. As we noted, that BAH counts as income when determining SNAP eligibility. Now, my legislation would address the unacceptable situation and ensure that these families are able to put food on the table. And so, Ms. Hubbard, I know you've talked about this already, but how would a food allowance change the circumstances for service members who are currently relying on food banks if this legislation was passed?
Well, as you mentioned, it would basically give folks some additional resources and increase their purchasing power for things like food, for their basic needs. I think we want to see that. I think if folks are, if they don't have these resources, they are turning to the charitable sector for food, and that's unacceptable. I think there's nothing wrong with food pantries for emergency needs, but it's unacceptable that service members are turning to pantries routinely to help feed their families. And so this benefit would really enable folks to have some additional resources to be able to adequately address their basic needs for food.
I agree. And I think your word unacceptable is more than appropriate. I got a few minutes left. Ms. Hollywood, you note that one intersecting issue, along with the issues that we've discussed with the basic allowances for housing, is military spouse unemployment. And as I've noted, and I just talked about the Military Spouse Hiring Act, which would make military spouse eligible for the Work Opportunity Tax Credit. How would that help address the unemployment crisis amongst military spouses? And if you could also elaborate on the key drivers of military spouse unemployment in your answer.
So the main key driver is the lack of childcare. Another key driver is, military spouses unfortunately need flexible and a lot of times remote work, because if you've got a military spouse who's deployed for 6 months out of the year, it's a much different dynamic than a family whose spouse doesn't go on deployments, right? So then you're left with a whole other set of problems. But I think anything that helps move the needle for military spouse unemployment and gets employers more interested in hiring military spouses, as this act would do, would be a great move in the right direction. So I think that would really open the door to more employers pursuing hiring of military spouses.
Thanks, Ms. Hollywood, and thanks to all of our witnesses for highlighting such an important, unacceptable issue as what we've been talking about today. I yield back, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Panetta. I'm not sure if the gentleman from New York rejoined, Representative Jacobs, or the gentlelady from Florida, Representative Kamek. Okay, I now yield to the gentleman from Florida, Representative Lawson. You have 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I would like to say Happy Veterans Day to all of those members on this committee who are veterans and served for so many years. My question would be primarily to Ms. Hubbard right now, but anyone on the panel may answer. Ms. Hubbard, you mentioned in your testimony the need for Congress to explore transitional benefits for service members and their family leaving the military service. In your opinion, what sort of services should be included in the transitional benefit, and how long should they last?
Well, thank you. Thank you for the question. And I think that period of transition between active service and transition back to civilian life, I think, is a critical time. And it is a time when the risk at food insecurity can rise. And so I think the VA and the DoD need to do a better job at improving kind of the policies and the systems that help folks making that transition. One of the things that I mentioned in my testimony was for the TAP program needing to be a better bridge to federal food programs like SNAP. I think, from my understanding, the program could be more effective at delivering information about those resources. I think oftentimes folks who go through the program, it's kind of like a fire hose of information that is hard to retain. And so I think thinking about different ways to be able to link people to these resources during their transition is important. And then the other piece is looking at providing a 6-month transitional SNAP, a temporary targeted transitional SNAP program for exiting service members at a certain rank level, so that they don't have to worry about food security during those 6 months while they're establishing themselves, while they're finding a home and finding job and getting back on their feet in the civilian world. So something like that, I think, would be very helpful for service members during that critical time.
Did anyone else on the panel want to comment on that?
So I think getting upstream of some of the problems will also help with transitioning veterans. So, back to my earlier comment about the 95% of the local housing, military members get 95% of the local housing. As a person who moved 10 times in 20 years, every time you move, you have out-of-pocket expenses, and that just kind of complicates things as you then transition out of the military. So getting upstream of those problems, I think, is another way to solve this.
And one other question I wanted to ask to the committee for the panel is, does military ranking, regardless of what branch of the service you come out, has a great deal to do with whether you're going to have food insecurity? And this is a big,
Our research shows that it's mostly junior enlisted and other enlisted, more senior enlisted families, particularly face food insecurity.
I would like Mr. Keaton to comment on that.
Well, it wasn't exactly an issue for me, but I did see that happening when I got out, and people I know, yeah, you didn't make much money when you were in. You're not going to have much money when you leave. If you're in the higher ranks, you're going to make more money. You have the savings. You're going to be able to afford it. It's kind of reflective of American society in general. But I mean, we're only as good. Somebody said great country. I think we're only as great as our most disenfranchised person, and that should never be a veteran.
That is amazing. And I also, like my colleagues, Mr. Bacon and some of them, to think about after serving 30 years or so, what it was like when they exit the military. And Madam Chair, since I only have a few more seconds, I'm gonna yield back. I don't think I can get the other question in, which that I have in the state of Florida, the third largest veteran population according to the Census Bureau. And about 130,000, 800,000 those are women. And I worry about the transition of women back into the workforce and SNAP benefits and everything else with kids and so forth. But I don't have enough time, so with that, I yield back.
Well, thank you, Representative Lawson, and thank you for bringing that to the attention of this committee. I now recognize the gentleman from the Northern Mariana Islands, Representative Sablan. Oh, did I lose him? Okay. I will yield to the gentleman from New York, Representative Maloney. Moving right along, we have a guest joining us today, the gentleman from Georgia and chairman of the House Ag Appropriations Committee, Representative Bishop. Welcome to our committee. You are recognized for 5 minutes for questioning.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Let me thank all of the members of this subcommittee for your attention to this very, very important issue. Let me also commend Representative Panetta and for the introduction of the Military Hunger Prevention Act, which is very much needed. And I certainly agree 100% with the need for the basic needs allowance. But I'd like to ask Ms. Hollywood, Ms. Hubbard, and then Mr. Keefe to comment about their knowledge of the bill that we have introduced along with members of the subcommittee dealing with military hunger, the Equal Access to the Right Nutrition Act, the EARN Act. I think there have been a number of hearings where Ms. Hollywood and Ms. Hubbard have participated. I'd like for you to comment on it. Based on what we've heard today, the need for a national eligibility threshold, for example, the need for the transitional assistance, the need for a better data collection, to be able to actually document, which we've been looking forward to, the need to have the Department of Defense and the Department of Agriculture work out some kind of cooperative agreement so that they can together address this problem for our military families. The possibility of an automatic enrollment for our military families who would be eligible for SNAP. The basic allowance for housing looked at as we compare that to Section 8, for example, of HUD, which is exempt in calculating SNAP benefits. But for a military family that lives on post and receives the basic allowance for housing, they're penalized. So with that background, let me ask Ms. Hollywood and Ms. Hubbard to comment on how the EARN Act would complement the Military Hunger Act that Mr. Panetta has offered and which we hope will soon become law.
Thank you, sir. I mean, the EARN Act has been helpful in raising awareness about military food insecurity and short-term solutions like the EARN Act, inclusion of the basic needs allowance in the NDAA, and removing barriers to SNAP eligibility from the Farm Bill, even more broadly, are extremely helpful. I do believe, though, in the long run, that the root causes that I addressed earlier in my testimony really need to be resolved in order to prevent this problem from existing in the first place.
And thank you, Congressman Bishop, for your commitment to ending hunger among military and veteran families. I think the EARN Act has really started and contributed to this larger conversation about how to address these issues in a comprehensive way. And I think we welcome any legislation that's going to generate more conversation about potential solutions. And we welcome the opportunity to work on this with you, and also to be a part of future hearings where we're able to explore this particular piece of legislation further. I think from where I sit, I think the single most important thing that we can do right now is pass the military family basic needs allowance provision in the NDAA. It's on the table now, and it would provide immediate assistance to families. But we certainly look forward to exploring other viable options to address this issue. That one piece of legislation and that one provision is not going to, get us there. It's going to be a great start, but we definitely would be open to talking about other ways that we need to address this issue, because it's been too long of an issue to have been ignored the way it has.
Thank you. I think my time is about expired, but if you could share some top-line conclusions from your upcoming report with Blue Star families on the disproportionate impact that Black and Hispanic families in general face, particularly. Can you share top-line conclusions quickly?
Sir, I don't have the actual stats right now, other than that our research did actually say that that military families of color, and we haven't released. We just conducted a military families of color study this summer. The results aren't all finalized yet, but our top line results do show that food insecurity is higher in military families of color than their white peers. We'll be releasing those results in February of 2022.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to participate in the hearing as the interloper.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman Bishop. I now recognize the gentleman from New York, Representative Baloney. You have 5 minutes for questions.
Well, I thank the chair so much for convening this hearing, and I'm particularly delighted to learn more about this subject and to see my constituent Denise Hollywood here from Port Jervis, New York. People who don't know the area may not realize that Port Jervis is in western Orange County, New York, out on the border with Pennsylvania and New Jersey, but it's also, not that far from the United States Military Academy at West Point. And so right now, I think, the largest construction projects in the Army are at West Point. We spend, and properly so, a huge amount of taxpayer dollars making sure we have the best trained, best equipped, most extraordinary group of young officers anywhere in the world coming out of the United States Military Academy. And yet, just a few miles down the road, an organization like Blue Star Families, right, is working on an issue that represents a whole nother spectrum of the reality that so many people who serve in our military face. And so I really just want to give you an opportunity to explain to folks who may find this hard to believe, what the unique barriers are, Ms. Hollywood, to military families when they're trying to access the SNAP benefits that they've earned. And it's particularly glaring to know how many are accessing benefits because they're food insecure and their families. But of course, there's a great number that are eligible that aren't receiving those benefits. And I'd love to give you an opportunity to talk about that if you could.
Thank you, sir. And yes, I was up at West Point yesterday. A lot of construction going on in that area. So one of the things I think that we've seen in our research is that, and whether it's food insecurity or whether it's financial insecurity, that military families, you have to go through your chain of command to get help. Oftentimes you have to go through your chain of command to get help. And there's this stigmatism that's associated with that. So I think really trying to overcome that, even with terms like maybe food insecurity isn't the right way to approach it with our military families and our veterans. Like maybe we need another, nourish to flourish, or some other way that we can help destigmatize this issue with our military families. So and then again, getting them the access that they need to those resources. The three real areas that we talked about getting down upstream of the problem: military spouse unemployment, the unreimbursed relocation expenses that all military families get every time that they move, and then just the out-of-pocket housing expenses because of the housing allowance doesn't meet 100% of the actual rents in that area. I think those are the three main causes that we see that actually, continue to make this problem not go away for military families.
And I know you've done important work on this with the Military Family Lifestyle Survey, and if you could just expound on that a little bit, please, because we've certainly seen this in other areas where we're trying to help our vets and their families, and sometimes, yes, there's a reluctance to ask for help, and that barrier, which is sometimes self-imposed, is particularly, I think, challenging. Talk a little bit about how we can do better on that, and what some of the survey work you've done can tell us.
We've been doing this military family lifestyle survey. It's the largest of its kind for 10 years now. And what we do then, we're not a lobbying group, but we are an advocacy organization. We try to bring this the results of these surveys to senior government leaders to help us move the needle. Our theory of change is we listen, partner, share, and act. So what we try to do is listen to what military families are really saying. And we get a lot of great input from military spouses who really bear the burden of military moves. They bear the burden of childcare. They bear the burden of maybe household incomes that aren't as high as they would like because of spouse unemployment issues. So when we gather this research, then we work with partners to try to find creative solutions, and we share that information with government leaders to help us advocate for solutions such as the ones we've discussed today on this panel.
Representative Maloney, you're muted.
Excuse me. Well, thank you so much. And we really appreciate your help in shining a light on this important issue, particularly as we celebrate our veterans and military families on Veterans Day. So thank you all for your important work. And thank you, Madam Chair, for holding this hearing. And I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Keith, it seems like you're the only one that knows how to work the mute button here. I think that brings us to the end of our member questioning. If there are any other members on the platform who would like to ask a question, I will now recognize you. Okay, with that, I invite the ranking member, Congressman Bacon, to share any closing comments he may have.
Thank you very much. And again, I thank our panelists for being on today and sharing your perspective. Madam Chair, I have a statement from the American Logistics Association. They provide some details how the supply chain also affects food insecurity for our military. So I'd like to submit that for the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. Also, I just want us to be careful. If we start talking about change in BAS and BAH, in the end, we do not want that to become considered taxable income for real taxable income, because it'll end up being a 10 or 20% cut with taxes being taken out for these individuals. So we just want to be careful how we address this, in my view. And I had maybe a follow-up question, but maybe it's too late to get the panelists to comment on this. There was a mention on there that minorities are affected more. I would love to get a little more detail how that works, if it's the same pay and the same thing. So maybe I'll come back and try to get those details, because I'd like to understand that better. And I will just also commit to the chair lady and to the team that I'm going to write a letter to DOD. I want to get their position on this. I could do it. I'm also on the HASC. I could do it either way here, but we need to know, is this a real issue with our junior enlisted ranks? And if it is, the military needs to say it is and give us the scope of the problem. And we need to work into it and lean into it and figure out how we're going to fix this. So with that, Madam Chair, I just appreciate the time to make some closing remarks. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Representative Bacon, and thank you for your unique perspective on this issue. And again, thank you for your service. I would also like to sincerely thank all of the witnesses today. We genuinely appreciate you for being here to share your experiences. Your testimony and answers to our questions paint a picture of the challenges faced by veterans and active duty military members that we will need as we work to remedy this problem on this committee. I hope we can all agree that even one hungry veteran or service member is too many. I ask the other members of this committee to reflect on what we have heard today and to come together to find solutions that will ensure our veterans and service members have the basic dignity of knowing that they will have food on the table for themselves and their families. Under the rules of the committee, the record of today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive additional material and supplemental written responses from the witnesses to any questions posed by a member. This hearing of the Subcommittee on Nutrition Oversight and Department Operations is adjourned. Thank you.